What we wanted to do was unpack the culture of the industry and then look at how can leaders influence workplaces to improve wellbeing outcomes, yes, but also to improve creative outcomes. And this is the thing that always drew me to this work. 72% said that the screen industry is not a mentally healthy place to work. 48% experienced bullying in the past year. 72% disagreed that the psychological well-being of workers is a priority for their organisation. Most people are well-intentioned in our industry. Most people want their people to be happy, healthy, safe. It's just the fact that we work in these conditions that means that that's not always the case.
Welcome to the podcast, Jonathon Dutton.
Thank you so much. It's good to be here.
You have worn many hats in the screen industry, including as an actor and a director. And now you're managing partner alongside Ben Steele of Screenwell. Such amazing work that you two do. There has been a growing conversation the last few years about wellbeing in the industry. And I'm really excited to talk to you today. I just want to dig in what's going on here in Australia, what you're seeing overseas, and the work that you're doing to build an industry that looks after its people, because that's just so important. What is it specifically that Screenwell does?
Our mission is to improve the mental health and wellbeing outcomes of the Australian screen industry. There are so many factors that influence and intersect with mental health. So we'll look at how can we improve mental health outcomes for individuals, what can productions do, what can traditional workplaces do to improve mental health outcomes in their workplaces, and then we look at what can we do at an industry level. So what are some of the industry level interventions? What can we do from a research perspective? What do we need to know more about? What are the opportunities for innovation? That's really what it takes. You have to be looking at the whole thing, the whole picture.
It really is just an interwoven ecosystem, and that makes such a difference when you bring it all together like that. On a personal level, how did you get involved? What made you so passionate about mental health in this industry?
Yeah, well, look, I've worked in the industry for a long time, and I think you mentioned I've worn many hats. I returned to study in 2017, and I was looking at things like leadership and culture, and I was really drawn to it, particularly when I thought about my experience in the screen industry. And when I finished my master's, I started doing some consulting work in the industry, but also in other industries. And it was around that time, I think, that Ben reached out to me, just comparing notes and seeing the intersection and the overlap between things like the culture of the industry, leadership, mental health. We decided we have to work together. So we partnered with the University of Melbourne. We started a research initiative with them. What we wanted to do was unpack the culture of the industry and then look at how can leaders influence workplaces to improve wellbeing outcomes, yes, but also to improve creative outcomes. And this is the thing that always drew me to this work, was how can we actually create environments that enable us to do our best work? So that research resulted in the Leadership Matters report, and then I became a partner at the start of this year because we're certainly stronger together.
There's so many different factors that influence mental health, and leadership is such a big one. And often, because of the freelance nature of this industry, we don't have opportunities to grow as leaders or be trained as leaders in a way that does support everyone else around us.
Yeah, well, that was a big part of what we discovered. I think the stat was 7% of screen leaders have received leadership training in some way, shape or form, which is very low. I think what really struck me was when you think about the hospitality industry and other sectors, it's mandatory before they go on to manage people, but we just don't have that. It's just not part of our culture in the screen industry.
The decisions leaders make and the way that they manage culturally has such an impact on everyone around them.
It's the most important thing. 70% of what determines an outcome of a workplace is leadership. And then next to that, it's peer relationships. So much of it is actually just how we relate to each other.
So let's talk about the Australian screen industry as a whole. I know that Screenwell recently partnered with Griffith University and you did a 2-year mental health and wellbeing survey. Those results were pretty harrowing. 25% of workers in the screen industry were looking to leave within the next 6 months.
That does feel like the headline. The stat was 36% have considered quitting in the last 6 months and 25% said they were likely to leave in the next 6 months, which really speaks to the sustainability of the industry, and obviously there's lots of factors as to why that might be the case. It's not all mental health, but it's certainly a big part of it. Some of the other stats that really stood out to me, 72% said that the screen industry is not a mentally healthy place to work. 48% experienced bullying in the past year. I often talk to people who feel like we've got that one solved. It's not the case. 72% disagreed that the psychological well-being of workers is a priority for their organisation. I think that's one for businesses to really sit and ponder, because that is the perception. The perception is our psychological well-being is not a priority. That's really one of the key ones for businesses to be thinking about. How can we actually set our workplaces up for success?
There's so many factors that lead into these stats. What do you think some of the key things are, particularly those that are unique to this industry?
Yeah, look, it's pretty hard to look past the structural stuff, isn't it? The long hours, the 10-hour days that often creep into longer days. I think job insecurity, the fact that we've got a big freelance workforce going from job to job. And then, of course, you've got budgets, resourcing, not always matching creative ambition. And that's really tough. It's a really tough problem. So these structural issues are super challenging and they're complex, and they're going to require time, I think, to shift the needle on some of those things. The good news is there are things that we can do. And it's not just box ticking or putting a Band-Aid over the problem. There are actual preventative things that we can be doing.
So where do we start? Say, as an individual listening to this, what would be your first recommendations to get their own mental health and wellbeing stable and essentially put their own life jacket on first?
Yeah. Well, it's pretty hard to not start with know thyself. So taking the time to reflect on yourself and what you need, particularly knowing the intensity of the workplaces and the work that we do, being prepared and having boundaries. I mean, preparedness is a protective factor. If you prepare yourself for what you might encounter and have thought about how you might manage that, that's a really big protective factor. And I think the big one, and this is the one that we really need help with as well, is if you're not feeling great, you've got to reach out, you've got to communicate. And when I say that we're not that great with it, there is a fear of speaking up in our industry. That's pretty well known. The fear of speaking up often comes for a number of different reasons, but there is concerns about reputational damage, those types of things. But the number one message would be, if you are struggling, speak up and prioritise your mental health.
I mean, I can really relate to that from my time as a crew member. You are on set, you're working these long hour days, there's no time and resources. What does that look like? Is that journaling? Is that answering a series of questions?
It's actually taking that time to reflect, isn't it? It's thinking about, what were the challenges on that previous production and how can I learn from them and how can I prepare for them? And I think boundaries is a really key one. What do I need to do if and when? Really being prepared for anything that might make things difficult for you, and being as proactive as you can.
That is one of the benefits of the nature of our industry, is having time available between jobs where you can take that step back and reflect. You might not always get to do it in the heat of production, but you can take those lessons to the next one.
Absolutely. I mean, there's other complications, of course, with those downtimes, particularly if you're worried about the next job or, finances or whatever the case may be. But yes, absolutely. That downtime, if we can use that strategically, it's a good thing.
Are you finding that this is an area that people are starting to talk about with others on set or within their department?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's generally more awareness in society around mental health broadly. So I would say yes, but it is still something that we need to work on as an industry, particularly because of the environments that we work in, particularly because of the hours, the challenging working conditions, time away from home, disrupted sleep from night shoots. I mean, that's obviously production specific, but everywhere across the industry, people work really long hours. There's lots of stresses. There's lots of stuff like that. So I think we have to get better at acknowledging that. And that's one of the things that we often say to productions is acknowledging that upfront, that this is a challenge. We're aware of those challenges and we're going to support you in any way that we can. That's a really important piece of the puzzle.
For a producer or production that wants to support crew, but they don't know where to start, what are a few simple things that they could put in place heading into their next project?
One of the most important things is setting expectations. And I've heard of lots of different ways people do this. From having a town hall at the start of a production, even referencing some of the stats that we've spoken about and talking about the fact we want this production to be as supportive as possible. Talking about bullying, the fact that there is still a high prevalence, and we know that because of various research that exists, and that we, as a result, we want you to feel like you can speak up and we will respond. I also refer to that as making policies real. What are the things in the policies that you want to highlight and really make sure that people know that this is a thing that we care about and we are going to stand by and we are going to be really consistent about. You can't say one thing and do another, or it's not going to end well. The other thing I think is really important is checking in. As production teams, producers, checking in with heads of department checking in with their teams. We've talked about there is a fear of speaking up. And so what that can create is blind spots. It's really easy for people in production offices or, in different parts of the industry to just not be aware that there's a problem in the first place, or that people are struggling, or that, the string of night shoots have actually had a really detrimental impact. So checking in and then being proactive about supporting people. We have to be honest about what's going on and we have to respond.
I think that blind spots issue is a big one, and some of it is due to that hierarchical nature and that fear of, if I say something, will I not be liked? Will I not be asked back on the next job? There was a production I was involved with as a producer, and we had someone from a completely different department come to us and say, hey, I think someone over in that other department is struggling. And we looked into it and it turned out there was an issue, but we would not have known about that if that person hadn't come to us. So I'm really grateful for that conversation. But there are a lot of people who, if they don't necessarily know you on a personal level, they don't want to be the one that sticks their head out of the sand. As you say, even just having that production-wide conversation up front about expectations and what you can do sets the culture that this is normal.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it also breaks down power imbalances, which is what you're talking about, because the power imbalances are very real. And sometimes when you're in power, you may not necessarily be aware of it, that people are less likely to speak to me or to challenge me or to disagree with me or to tell me about the thing that happened because I'm the one that's making the decisions, or whatever that role may look like, So it is really important to be aware of the impact of power imbalances in a hierarchical industry.
Are there examples of productions that have set up people to talk to avoid that power imbalance, like having a mental health representative on set, for example?
It's pretty new in Australia. There are wellbeing facilitators in the UK. They're pretty widespread, and it's something that Screenwell's looking at bringing to Australia. It means that there's someone there all the time that people know that they can speak to. And there can be other people on sets that can perform that role. It's also just being really mindful of their other responsibilities. Mental health first aid, for example, is, a training where people know how to respond to people in distress. Having multiple people on a production that are trained in that.
Yeah, that's such fantastic training. It's like doing a first aid course. It's just a nice refresher on what to do if you see something, how you can help. As part of the conversation when I did my mental health first aid training, the question came up, why don't we just put mental health support numbers on call sheets? And I'm seeing that more and more alongside the hospital and the police phone numbers, which I think is amazing.
Yeah. And the Support Act hotline.
What does the Support Act hotline do? I think there's a lot of people in the industry who still don't know that it exists.
Yeah, well, it's just a dedicated support line for people in the creative industries to reach out if they're struggling. It's a first port of call. You could also think of it as an EAP, employee assistance programs, although they're usually dedicated to a particular workplace. But it's somewhere that anyone can call anytime, 24/7. If you're struggling and you work in the creative industries, you can call and you can get advice and support. And they will refer you. They will triage you based on what you're experiencing and refer you to other sources of support.
I think that's amazing.
Yeah, it is. And it's underutilized. We don't really know about it. It should be on every call sheet.
Absolutely. So we've touched on the production company level, and opening up the conversations is a great start. If issues arise out of those conversations or reports come through, where would you recommend people turn?
Every workplace will have a policy these days. Unfortunately, a lot of policies get given to us at the start. We say we've read them even though we haven't, and we move on, and that's the end of it. But they do actually have information about what to do. The next piece of the puzzle is making sure that productions are also set up correctly as per those guidelines. So with bullying and harassment, for example, you should really have multiple contact officers on a production that people can go to if they have experienced something. In terms of where to go from there, reporting accountability for bullying and harassment is something that we are looking at because we are acutely aware that this remains an ongoing challenge within the industry. But you can go to, SPA, MEAA, you can go to unions, and of course there's, you can elevate things further.
What people often don't realise is bullying is actually illegal.
It is, yeah. It's illegal, and, workplaces under the new psychosocial safety legislation also have a positive duty to minimise the conditions in which that exists. What that legislation says is that we have to think about psychological health in the same way that we think about physical health. You have an obligation as an employer to identify risks that could affect people's psychological health and mitigate those risks. So you actually have to have a plan for what to do if that happens, which is great. And that's why Screenwell developed a course on it. So it's for anyone that manages people, but it's also for business owners and producers or anyone that's responsible for a workplace to understand what their obligations are. So what they actually need to do, what this legislation says that they need to do, or they will be, open to legal problems.
Amazing. Well, we'll make sure that people have access to that in the show notes. So I want to talk about your summit. This year, you ran a summit and a series of roundtables that followed on from that to really dig into some of the opportunities to co-design solutions for mental health in the screen industry.
Yeah, so that was a really great moment in time for Screenwell, the Mental Health Matters Summit in January. What that summit did was it got 70 leaders together from across the industry, from all different areas of the industry, streamers, broadcasters, production companies, to really dig into and think about how we're actually going to improve mental health outcomes for the screen industry. So we started presenting the Griffith University research findings, and we also paired that with lived experience stories because it's so easy to think about data as data. 75% of people have experienced this, but we are actually talking about real people's experiences. So we also shared lived experience stories. And then we went into an expert panel, which was terrific because the first part of the day was, really sitting with the challenges. And then the expert panel was about, let's start thinking about what is possible. And that conversation really shifted, I think, the energy of the summit into, okay, we can actually do something about this. And hearing from the CEO of Mates in Construction, the construction industry is actually very similar to us in lots of ways. And they are world leaders in how they respond. You may not think of the construction industry as being world leaders in mental health, but there you go. And the last part of the day was about getting everyone on their feet and contributing to solutions. So we had 3 workshop stations looking at, what are the areas we should prioritise, how can we work together, and how can we actually fund this as an industry so we can shift the needle. That workshop was the beginning of our roundtables, which we've been running over the last couple of months. We've been very fortunate to gain the support of Netflix, Prime Video, BBC Studios Australia and Disney Studios Australia to run these and develop a mental health action plan for the industry. It really does feel like we've got a really terrific and engaged group of leaders and broad-based support from a real broad cross-section of the industry saying, yes, if we all do these things together, we can actually shift some of those statistics that we heard about in that Griffith University research.
What are some of the conversations that people are really passionate about, or some of the solutions that you're starting to engage with already, if you can talk about them?
So we've looked at different parts of the problem, as I said. What are the preventative actions that we can take, but also how do we make it easy? And that's what a lot of these conversations are about. How do we make it easy for people to do the right thing? Because most people are well-intentioned in our industry. Most people want their people to be happy, healthy, safe. It's just the fact that we work in these conditions that means that that's not always the case. So what can we do, and how can we make it easy for people to do the right things? That's really a big part of what we're focusing on. So with psychosocial safety, for example, what resources can we create that make it easy for people to go, what are the risks? And we can have a set of recommendations about what we can do about it. So what training do we need to help people? Reporting and accountability. So that was really around bullying and harassment. How can we stay more on top of what's going on productions in our workplaces? How do we address the blind spots? Just workplace and industry level support. And thinking also about the different needs of productions. So small to medium productions are obviously resource constrained. So how can we make it even easier for them?
I think you're absolutely right. It really comes down to well-intentioned people who are constrained by the time and resources available to implement all of this. So I love that you're putting together tools and making it as easy as possible for people to engage and make it better for their crews.
Yeah, because it is really complex. There is a lot to get your head around if you want to really set your production up for success. The mental health action plan that we'll be producing as part of this is really about summarising that and making recommendations in the short term for what can we all do now, as in we know what the structural challenges are, but these are the things that we can do right now. Then we're going to be looking at things that we can do in the medium term, which may require resources, tools, and then we're also going to hopefully paint a vision for the future around what would we ideally like to get to in 5 to 10 years' time.
If someone's listening today and they care about mental health and well-being and they want to take the first step in making our industry better, where should they go and what should they do?
Well, look, there's an enormous amount of resources on the Screenwell website. There's a resource hub, an ever-growing resource hub with checklists, guides, all kinds of things. There's also our psychosocial safety online course, which is really a terrific place to start. That framework provides a way to think about risks and identify them, and then think about how you can mitigate those risks. So if you're keen to learn about psychosocial safety, jump on to on our website with the EOI.
We always finish our episodes asking our guests for a big idea or suggestion that they have to change our screen industry for the better. So if you could pitch an idea, what would it be?
If I had a magic wand, it would be to abolish the 10-hour day or the 50-hour week and keep it a little bit more family friendly. But look, I think the reality is we are a part of a global industry that also works in particular ways. So in the absence of that, I would say we have to take psychosocial safety seriously, and we have to focus on people within the context of the stories we tell. And I say that not just because of mental health and wellbeing outcomes, but because I know that if we do that, we will also create better work. You know, we can create environments where people can do their best creative work.
I'm so excited to see where this work that you and Ben are doing leads, and I've already seen shifts in the industry since Screenwell kicked off. So thank you for the work you do, and thank you for being on the podcast.
We Interrupt This broadcast is recorded on the unceded lands of the Bunurong people of the Kulin Nation and the Kaurna people of the Adelaide Plains, and we acknowledge them as the traditional custodians and first storytellers of these regions. Always was, always will be.